Capturing and describing culture is a difficult task. One way to understand culture is in terms of layers. The first layer is behaviors and symbols. So these are things we can actually observe. They might be things that we see when we first get off a plane in a new country. For example, how people greet each other, how people answer their phone, perhaps how people sign their emails, how do they celebrate holidays, how many holidays do they celebrate. So these behaviors and symbols are things that we can actually see and readily observe. The next layer is the norms and values. So the norms are the social rules that let us know how to act and what to expect from others in social situations. It also might tell us how to greet each other with a kiss, for example, or a handshake. This also shapes, again, our expectations of other people, how they act and how we interpret how they act. On the other hand, we also have values, and these are things that guide what's important to us. And so a lot of times the values is what's underlying all of our different choices. So when we first encounter a culture, we often just see the first layer, but often there is a norm or value that explains what it is that we're seeing. Maybe we need to spend more time with the culture or have a discussion with others in order to understand the norms and values. So this first layer is really the explicit culture, while the other layers are increasingly more implicit. Think of an iceberg. What do you see above the surface? Is the explicit culture, because you can detect it quickly with your senses. This is sometimes can even include the values and norms if they're explicitly communicated. Everything then below the surface is implicit culture. But even then there's a layer below norms and values, and that is the basic assumptions. The basic assumptions can be very difficult for someone from a certain culture to articulate because it is so ingrained in that culture, so much a part of their life, that they have no way of explaining it. In fact, the only way to explain it might be in comparison with other cultures. So what I've described here is a contrast between the explicit culture, so again, what we see, what we can observe, and the things that are right in front of us. So the implicit culture then is that next layer where we don't see right away. And in order to illustrate this point, I will tell you a personal story of mine. So when I first moved to Germany in 2012, I had actually never been to Germany before. I didn't speak a word of German. I didn't really know much about German culture. In the first week or 2 weeks, once or twice when I was walking to my office, I had this really strange encounter. Basically, I crossed the street and somebody would start yelling at me. Of course, I didn't understand a word of what they were saying, and so I went to my office and I asked my colleagues, what's happening here? They said, well, in Germany, you just don't cross the street when red, only when green. So I'm coming from New York State, and I'm thinking when you cross the street, you cross it when it's free, when it's clear, when there's nobody else coming. I wasn't endangering anybody, nobody was really being bothered by what I was doing, but that was it. No greater explanation except that you just don't do it. So I thought, okay, I understand this norm. I understand that norms or rules in general are highly valued in Germany. So I got my head around this. Some time goes by, and eventually I started being able to speak and understand German. And one day, like seeing something that was hidden in plain sight the whole time, I noticed a sign. It was underneath the lamp. And the sign said, don't cross, only when green. But it also said, don't cross unless it's green in order to be a good role model for children. And that's what I was missing, is this basic assumption. I understood the behavior, the first level, don't cross when red. I understood that a rule or a norm this is part of German culture and that these norms are highly valued. But I still just didn't understand why. And at first, none of my German friends or colleagues could tell me the basic assumption because it was so obvious to them. They'd grown up with this basic assumption that we are a community, and when it comes to children and families, it's not just about what you do as an individual, but how you actually affect the children around you. Whereas I come from a place where if there was a behavior you didn't want your child to do, it was your responsibility and yours alone. So after living nearly 10 years in Germany, I can say that I always wait to cross when red when there are children around.